Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to class. This is our second lecture. I wanted to point out that in a couple of the lectures that I've given this week for my other classes, and maybe this one as well, I seem to have like a glitch with the Zoom, so that when I'm sharing screens, like the slides, for some reason, every so often, it looks like the slide just kind of freezes. And even though on my end, I still move on and talk about other things and other things appear on the screen, it's not actually shared with you. And then I think like a minute later, it suddenly catches up. Unfortunately, because I'm not aware when that's happening, because to me, it looks normal on my screen. I'm not aware if that happens. So until I figure out what the problem is, I think it might just be I downloaded the new version of Zoom and it's kind of glitchy or whatever. But if it appears during the lecture that the screen is not updating and you're not seeing stuff on the slide that it sounds like you should be seeing because I'm talking about it, feel free to unmute yourself, and just say, hey, Dr. Shen, I think the slide is stuck or whatever. And then maybe I can try to go backwards or forwards or something and figure it out. Don't just send me a chat message because I don't see that there are chat messages coming in until after I stop sharing the screen with you. So by then it's like too late. All right. So don't be shy. Just chime in. Let me know if it looks like there's a problem. And then everybody can benefit from me trying to fix it. And hopefully I'll get this resolved by next week. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and continue our introduction to the immune system and continue with our overview of all these types of things that we'll be talking about this semester. So we left off last time with this slide, and we said that when we think about the role of our immune system, we think about what it does for us and how it protects us. In order for our immune system to protect us, our bodies must be ready for diverse pathogens that we are exposed to. And remember that every single day of your life, we are surrounded by pathogens everywhere in the air, on the surfaces that we touch. Right? Some pathogens are common everyday ones that ever since you were born, you've been exposed to. So your entire life, you're used to dealing with certain types of things, like specific types of bacteria or even certain types of viruses. Other pathogens are more exotic, right? For lack of a better word. They're uncommon, that might be brand new to your body, like the first time in your 20 plus years of life, you're encountering this pathogen, or it's even a brand new pathogen that is new to the human species. So things like COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2, is an example of something that our species has previously not had to deal with. Right? I mean, we've dealt with different variations of coronaviruses, but this particular one that's causing this global pandemic right now that we're all affected by and suffering under is something new to the human species. So the human immune system has to be prepared to deal with both types, common everyday ones and exotic rare ones. If our immune system simply said, well, we'll deal with everything equally, right? We say, well, you play it safe. You just have major, super powerful immune reactions to everything, and that will take care of everything. That obviously wouldn't work well because that'd be a very inefficient use of our body's resources, right? I mean, it's one thing if, you have a rare virus that infects you and your body has to mount a defense. That's a very strong defense to save your life against that. But what if every time you got some bacteria in your tissues, like I say, you brush your teeth and you accidentally jam your gums with your toothbrush, you're like, ow, right? What if you did that and your body had to have this overblown immune reaction? That you cannot live like that. That's not compatible with life. So how does our immune system deal with familiar versus unexpected infections? We said that it must have two different sides, two cooperating sides to the immune system, a broad general response that's quick to act and very efficient in taking care of things before we even realize that we even were infected, but at the same time also a special focused attack response that's much more powerful and can really save our life against a pathogen that we've never seen before. And we're going to study over the course of the semester how these two sides work and how they work together. So in terms of broad general sensitivities against general everyday pathogens, I like to kind of think of it as this sort of story here. There are many types of pathogens like bacteria, viruses, that have just been with us throughout the entire evolution of the human species. So many types of bacteria all have similar types of features, right? They have certain types of structures, they have certain types of molecules, right? That through eons of evolution, our immune system, as it has evolved, through from vertebrates to more specifically mammals to primates like us, right? They've seen the same thing over and over again. So a general pathogen, everyday one, might be like what we call a typical clown, right? When you look at this picture of a generic kind of clown, there are certain features that immediately...
Dr. Shen, your screen is black.
Oh, it's black? Okay, let me try to back up a little bit here. Thank you for letting me know. Did that change it at all?
It's still black.
Okay, let me pause it and I will resume the share and see if that fixes it.
Dr. Shin, I think the problem is that other people haven't updated their Zoom because I'm seeing everything just fine on the screen.
Oh, okay. So that could be part of it, but I think there is something more to it than that, because like I said, even I noticed when I watched the recorded screen sharing of the previous lectures, maybe not necessarily this class, but the other ones, that there was a lag also. So it might be that there's two issues here. It might be that everybody needs to get the latest version of Zoom, or I don't know what, or operating system, because I think most of you just log on through a web browser, right? So it might be a web browser thing, but there's certainly more to it than that. Okay, what about, so originally the person who said that the screen was blank, can you see it now? So can all of you see the slide now?
On my side.
It's working okay now?
Which slide are we supposed to see?
I can see it.
It's a slide that says broad sensitivity to common antigen profiles, and there's a picture of a clown.
I still see the first one about the diverse pathogens.
Okay, so that. Oh, okay. So let me stop the share and or let me pause it again, or stop it. Okay, and let me go back and start share screen again. Okay. Do you see it now? Now it should be broad sensitivity against general
It's
pathogen
black.
profiles.
Yeah, it's still black. I don't know what's. Well,
It's
now
still
it's black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. So let me stop this.
Oh, I can see it now.
It's working now.
And now it
Now I
suddenly
see it.
appeared, right?
I can see
Yeah.
it.
So there's something weird going on, because even though I started it and you guys said it was still black, I didn't do anything else, and then all of a sudden it appears on your end. Okay. So sorry about that. I'll try to figure out if it's something that I can do. Although I'll say, obviously the last couple semesters that I've been teaching online, this has never come up as a problem. So certainly something new has developed here. Maybe it's the Zoom software. Okay, so thank you though. So feel free to interrupt if it happens again, okay? Because I want to make sure everybody can see this. So when you look at this picture of sort of your typical clown pathogen, right, this is what I like to think of. There are certain generic features of this clown that I think all of you automatically recognize as, oh yeah, that's a clown, right? There's like the crazy rainbow hair, there's the face paint, there's the colorful outfit, right? So all of these things immediately are things that a generic kind of clown, right, would present. And therefore, if through the course of evolution, bacteria, viruses present these same types of generic features, then it makes sense that our immune systems are equipped to kind of look for these types of things as an indication that there is a pathogen present. So you can imagine if you have this clown walking around in the general public, the clown is very easy to spot, right? So as a result, the types of guards that are needed in order to recognize these are these innately trained guards, kind of like this mall cop here in the slide, right? And he is trained to recognize a typical profile of a typical pathogen. In this case, these enforcers don't have to be super highly skilled. They only need to look out for these generic clown features. And you only need to have a limited number of these guys patrolling. For example, this boardwalk on the beach here, I think this is like Venice, California, right? And they can easily spot clowns, and they can easily arrest the clown and get the clown out of the general public there. Right? So the benefits of this is that this is modest security that's very effective and be maintained at a very moderate cost to protecting. On the other hand, right, if you have a highly infectious pathogen that represents, something new that is different enough than the typical pathogen profile, this might be something that we think of as the exotic clown. Okay? And so in this case, this guy here, this exotic clown, he's still a clown, right? But many of those generic features aren't present. Instead of a rainbow hat, he has this straw hat, right? Instead of, he has some face paint, but not as much as before. But instead of his rainbow shirt, he has this black t-shirt, right? So as a result, what this means is that some of the mall cops that are sort of patrolling, looking for certain features, if they're trained to look for things like face paint, right, they might say, hey, I do see some face paint here, right? But the other mall cops who are looking for things like the rainbow wig or the rainbow outfit, they're not going to notice anything. And so as a result, right, this clown here, bad clown, has an advantage, and he's able to kind of potentially outpace or escape the immune response and potentially make you very sick. Right? So an exotic pathogen like this might not be initially recognized by your immune system. He may multiply, spread within the body, and cause severe illness. So therefore, our immune systems must adapt. They must go beyond what they come pre-programmed to recognize and actually learn how to recognize something new. The key here is that by the time your immune system is alerted to the fact that bad clown is in fact a bad clown and he needs to be taken care of, enough time has gone by that potentially bad clown, this pathogen, has had a chance to really begin to spread and cause damage in your body. Right? So that means by the time this adaptive side of your immune system wakes up and goes to work, the defense that it has to mount has to be very powerful. So rather than just mall cop wandering around, right, with his little, his little plastic handcuffs or whatever, right, you need to have the SWAT team come in and really take out this pathogen. The immune response has to be overwhelming. It has to really be effective in overpowering a pathogen population that has already begun to spread through your body. And importantly, your adaptive immune response should remember this pathogen in the case of a future appearance. Because if bad clown here does have a chance to really start colonizing your body and making you sick, right? I mean, it's a threat to your health, right? It's a threat to you staying alive. And if you do get sick, your adaptive immune system, if it does succeed in saving you, it would be really bad if, like, every time bad clown came back in the future, months, years later, you would have to go through that same whole process again, right? Because maybe next time you're not going to be as lucky. So if your adaptive immune system can remember bad clown, for example, right, somehow preserving like a wanted poster that identifies bad clown, and before the first time you ever encountered bad clown, right, you would never have this wanted poster of bad clown as part of your knowledge, right? But if you can hang on to this poster in the future, then when bad clown appears again, you have certain ability to quickly recognize, hey, wait a minute, it's this guy again, right? Let's go ahead and take him out before he has a chance to make us sick. So the immune system has to be able to adapt to novel pathogen exposure. And all through your life, right, you're being exposed to new things that become part of the knowledge of your immune system. You are constantly building up from birth a whole library of these wanted posters that are filed away in your immune system, right, to protect you against the reappearance of these particular pathogens that you at first did not come equipped to recognize and handle. So let's kind of compare and contrast then the innate side versus the adaptive side. So when I use the term innate, innate means something that's already there, right? That's sort of automatically part of something. So our innate immunity is that automatic part of us that through evolution, right, has evolved to recognize certain common pathogen features. So therefore, our innate immune system is built up of different cells and different proteins that are basically functioning as MALCOP here, right? That come pre-equipped to recognize rainbow wigs, lots of face paint, and colorful outfits as being a pathogen. So the pros of that is that it's a very quick response because MALCOP, your innate effector components of your immune system, are circulating around. They're always patrolling, right? So when they see something, they're able to take care of it right away. And that's a very modest cost to maintain. You know, I use the example of MALCOP because you think about it this way, like your local mall, right? Whether you're talking about Ala Moana or Windward Mall, like on my side, you know, you might think like every day there are people doing bad stuff like shoplifting or, you know, potentially getting into fights in the food court or something like that, right? So you could say like, hey, why don't we just always have a SWAT team present at every single mall, right? And it should be obvious why that doesn't work, because that's way too expensive and it's way too overkill, okay? You'd rather have just a modest set of guards, the mall cops, just patrolling the mall, and that's good enough, right, to take care of any trouble. So those are the pros. The cons of that is that because these innate effector components of your immune system are just kind of like generally trained to look for obvious types of features, they may overlook something that's non-typical, right? And unfortunately, if that non-typical thing that doesn't fit the profile that they're looking for is a pathogen that then starts colonizing your body, you're going to get sick. The other con of that is the response plan of the innate immune side of your system is always the same, right? And you kind of imagine this MALCOP here, right? He was trained to basically always follow by the book. You do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, right? And so there's no flexibility in how they deal with things. So let's look at the adaptive side, right? So the adaptive side are effector mechanisms that are specialized, right, for a very particular focused response. They require this extra training to identify that something really is a novel pathogen. And again, we can imagine that when Bad Clown comes along, the first time your body's exposed to him, right, you have no previous knowledge that he's necessarily a pathogen, and your innate immune side maybe doesn't do a good job of recognizing him as a pathogen, right? It requires that your adaptive immune system begins to essentially realize that this is something bad, and they start printing out these wanted posters that then can be circulated to get the rest of your adaptive immune system to sort of wake up and recognize and look for this particular target. So the pros of this are that once your adaptive side really gets going, you can then mount a very strong, overwhelming reaction, right? So this is the SWAT team comes in and they're highly trained in order to take out the threat, right? The other pro of this is that your adaptive side, by its very nature, adaptive, means it's capable of memorizing and learning the pathogen identity for next time. And as I said before, that's like having many copies of this wanted poster that you keep, and you keep them plastered around in different places. Right? So there's a particular molecule or type of molecule in our adaptive immune system that is the wanted poster, right? And we will learn about that. Right? The cons of this is that it takes valuable time to coordinate this. Right? During that time, you are getting sick and you are on your path to dying. Right? If your adaptive system succeeds and wakes up, then it saves you. Right? But you know, it was quite costly during that time when you started getting really sick and ill. And the other con of this, as you can imagine, is that it's very expensive. Right? It takes a lot of your body's resources to do something like this. The process of seeing something new, recognizing it as being a threat, alerting your immune system through somehow passing on this message of wanted posters, and then actually getting these specially trained SWAT team members to come in and do their job, right? That's a much bigger investment than just having a few mall cops roaming around. So both the innate and adaptive responses, parts of our immune system, involve interactions between proteins and other proteins, right, as a way of communication. And many times we're talking about immune cells that have certain proteins on their surfaces that receive messages from other proteins that are coming in and alerting those immune cells that something is happening. So this is another place we can contrast the innate versus the adaptive side. On the innate side, because it's kind of a generic general response, you can use many different proteins, each one of which, you know, is the right shape to detect some sort of commonly presented shape on the surface of a pathogen. So you can use many proteins to detect these typical features of a group of pathogens that are not necessarily unique to a single specific example of just one type of bacteria or just one type of virus. Right? And then these proteins can cooperate to do things like very quickly bind to the target and serve as a label that actually highlights the fact, yeah, we have here a pathogen. And then you have immune cells that then are geared up to automatically then just go ahead and take care of it. On the other side, your adaptive side, right, because it's way more specific, rather than using a whole bunch of generic proteins, you know, by definition, what we are talking about is using very specific proteins of a very specific type or shape that matches a unique feature on this exotic pathogen. And only cells that are familiar and trained to recognize this feature are then chosen to be amplified, mobilized, and put to work attacking the target. So why not just stick with one or the other, right? I mean, I think I've already kind of gone over this, but I think it's worth thinking about because there are pros and cons to each. The preset readiness of the innate immune system is good because it's fast, right? And it's very moderate to maintain in terms of the cost of our body's resources. On the other hand, the adaptive side gives you flexibility for dealing with something brand new. The downside is it's a slower response time. And also the downside is it's very expensive to be able to run it properly. Okay. So that's why we evolved to have these two sides that work together. What happens if one side of your immune system or the other is somehow compromised? Right? So this figure helps us appreciate what happens in people who may have, let's say, a hereditary or inherited defect in one or more of the proteins or other components that are part of their innate general side or their highly focused specialized adaptive side. Right? In this case, let's look at this figure. Let's say that this individual is infected by bad clown, right? And this is the start of the infection over here. The moment bad clown gets into the person's tissues, that is the start of infection. So on the x-axis is the time that elapses from the time of infection. Right? What you would expect is that if you look at the colored lines here, these represent the levels of bad clown in the body, right? So as bad clown begins to multiply and spread, these lines go up, right? This is the spreading of the infection throughout the body's tissues. The yellow curve here indicates what a normal person who has robust, intact, both sides of their immune system, innate and adaptive, would respond like this, right? At first, bad clown, right, begins to colonize and spread, but the rate at which he is spread is being kind of suppressed because the innate side is still being able to somewhat recognize certain features on him, right? Like I said, you can imagine certain innate effectors like Malcops, right, would be recognizing things like the presence of the face paint. So they might still actually be attacking this exotic bad clown here, whereas the other cells or the other components that are recognizing things like rainbow hair or colorful outfit, they're not doing anything, right? But there is still some activity there. And so as a result, the spread of bad clown follows this kind of curve, right? Over time, at a certain point, bad clown levels are rising in the body to the point where it's beginning to take its toll on health, right? So the person starts getting sick. At that point, you can see the innate side of your system is no longer succeeding at keeping this infection at bay. So that's when the adaptive side has to kick in. And the adaptive side, after this time lag, right, that's why this dotted line is here, once the adaptive side kicks in, then all of a sudden there's a very powerful defense that eliminates the infection, okay? But remember, to the left of this dotted line, this is before the adaptive side has kind of activated. It's just up to your innate side. And as a result, the closer you get to the dotted line from the left, the more sick the person is getting because bad clown is taking over. So what are these other lines? You can imagine some people may be born with alleles in the genes or mutations in certain genes that code for these different parts of their innate immune system, proteins that are part of either proteins that function by themselves or parts of cells. So those people might have a weakened innate immune system, even though they have still a perfectly fine adaptive side. Right? But to the left of the dotted line, it's just the innate side that kind of matters. If people have a weakened innate immune system, then they cannot do anything to help resist bad clown spreading, and bad clown, the levels really, really take off very quickly. That means people who have defects in their innate side, right, are likely to be much more susceptible to getting sick from common everyday exposures. So in other words, certain types of pathogens that, you know, a robust, healthy innate immune system would just eliminate before they even have a chance to make the person sick. Maybe people with an innate, weakened innate immune system would tend to get sick more. All right. On the other hand, this green line represents a person who was born with maybe defects in their adaptive side, but they have still an okay innate side. So the green line means they're still able to keep bad clown kind of at bay over here, right? But when eventually bad clown begins to take off and their adaptive side of their immune system needs to kick in, it doesn't kick in properly, right? So as a result, the levels of bad clown keep rising. Okay, so this kind of highlights the importance of us having both sides. All right, so that would be if you had only a weakened adaptive immunity, but your innate side is still okay. But keep in mind, the take-home message is the yellow line is really what the normal two sides of the immune system give us in terms of protection. So what we'll do is for the next couple lectures, we'll talk about the innate side of our system. And then pretty much the rest of the semester, we'll be talking about the adaptive side. Because the innate side, since it is the product of hundreds of millions of years of evolution, right, we share many of the same mechanisms of innate immunity with other organisms, right? Certainly all mammals have a very similar innate immune system, but even before evolutionary mammals, you're talking about things like fish, reptiles, other types of complex living things, right? They all need to have an innate immune system of some kind. And through the many, many millions of years of evolution, they have more or less come up with the same type of mechanisms. As a result, we have a very good understanding of how our innate side of our immune system works, right? And we can kind of just go over that in the course of a couple lectures. The adaptive side of our immune system evolved much later and is far more complex and intricate. Right? And so as a result, much more time in our semester is really trying to understand the components of that. But of course, throughout, we will see how the two work together. So our innate immune response itself has two kind of critical considerations that it needs to have. Number one is it needs to be able to recognize that a pathogen is even present. So as I said before, this kind of quick general recognition involves soluble proteins. So in other words, proteins that dissolve in water easily so that they are floating around in your blood or other fluids in your body, right? And some of these proteins are actually bound to the surfaces of different types of cells and act as receptors to receive signals. These soluble proteins and receptors, they may bind directly to the pathogen surface, or they may bind to different products that are actually given off by something like a bacteria, right? A living bacteria oftentimes releases different types of components from it. Right? And if those are sort of very generic types of signals that, again, have been seen time and time again over evolution, then your innate side of your immune system has evolved to recognize those types of things as well. It may also be that the innate immune cells are designed to recognize other cells of your body that are beginning to show strange signs of infection. Right? Again, if those are pretty common generic changes in your body's cells as the result of being infected, your innate immune system has evolved to recognize that as well. After the presence of a pathogen has been identified, then you need to recruit different types of cells or additional types of proteins to actually eliminate that pathogen. There are many types of cells that actually engulf or eat things like bacteria and viruses to destroy them through a process that we call phagocytosis. Right? So these immune cells that directly attack something like a bacteria and eat it, we tend to refer to them as effector cells. Right? So the term effector just means they're really directly doing something. They're carrying out, right, the plan to actually directly attack the pathogen. Some of these are not actually full-blown cells themselves, but certain proteins that are part of our innate immune system can actually directly attack and destroy targets as well. Examples of these are a family of proteins known as complement proteins that are abundant in the serum of your blood. You're filled with these complement proteins. They're made by your liver, and they're constantly flowing through your blood, waiting to bind to certain types of generic kind of targets. Right? And these complement proteins, once they bind, they can act both as the flags that somehow it's like you're putting little flags on something to make it easier for the immune system to recognize that there's something that needs to be destroyed here, or these complement proteins can in fact on their own disrupt the function of a bacteria or a virus. So we'll learn about those the next lecture. all of these protein and cell factors, the important thing to keep in mind is that they are pre-programmed in our individual genetic makeup, right? They are the result of certain genes that code for these proteins to be selected for over millions of years of evolution, because they're very good at being the right shape to recognize generic targets. And so that's why we say, because we are born with them in our genome, they are an innate part of us, right? And therefore they are part of our innate immunity. So let's take a look. This cartoon here, slide 9, we will go back to this cartoon over and over again through the semester. Right? It's a good one because it helps us keep track of how all these different cell types that we will be learning about sort of fit together in this diagram of our immune system. So all of the cells in our blood, right, things like the white blood cells, red blood cells, things like our platelets and things like that, all start off being made in our bone marrow. Right? So in our bone marrow, we have certain stem cells, like this brown cell here, which is a hematopoietic stem cell. That comes from Greek, right? Hema means blood, right? And poetic, just like the name poetic, right? It means like a poem, right? It's creating something new. So these are stem cells that make all of the other cells that make up our blood. You can see here that as these stem cells differentiate or change to create the many different types of cells that we need, there are two main divisions up here, right? And not surprisingly, those two main divisions are the innate side and the adaptive side. Right? So these cells over here are part of our innate immune system on the right, and they involve cells that, as the stem cell is differentiating and turning into different types of cells, some of them just end up becoming things like red blood cells, like the erythrocytes, or becoming the megakaryocyte cells that break apart and become the platelets. So typically we don't think about red blood cells and platelets as being effectors against pathogens, but we will learn that things like red blood cells do help out. Normally, when you think about your immune cells in your blood, you think about white cells, right? So those are the leukocytes. So the leukocytes, the white blood cells, you can see here, they consist of things like macrophages, right, dendritic cells, and then these, what we call granulocytes, because they look under the microscope like they're having little specks inside of them. So these are things like neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, and mast cells. And we will learn about the functions of all of these during the semester. Right? So these cells are all squarely in the innate effector side. These are our mall cops. Right? They are trained in a very general way through being able to recognize general signals that over the course of evolution have proven to be good, general generic signals to identify pathogens. Okay. Oops, sorry. These on the left are our adaptive cells. So this side of this cartoon, the left side, came much later in evolution. Right? And we will discuss that as we talk about the evolution of the immune system this semester. But these include cells like B cells or T cells or natural killer cells that, even though they come from the side, functionally function more like innate cells. Right? I think this is the side that you guys probably get excited about, because you hear about things like B cells and T cells and you want to know what they do. Right? So these cells are lymphocytes, and they specialize in having certain proteins on their surface, as represented by these yellow Y-shaped things here and these blue little bumps here, that give you the specific recognition of particular unique antigen targets. Right? So B cells become plasma cells, and they make free-floating versions of these Y-shaped things that we call the antibodies. Right? And those antibodies are the wanted posters that we've been talking about when we were using our story of good clown and bad clown. Right? The T cells have on their surface a special receptor known as the T Cell Receptor, or TCR. And we will certainly spend a lot of time understanding what those do. Okay, so there are 5 types of leukocytes, of white blood cells, that are found floating around in your blood. Right? Because not all of the immune cells can actually be seen easily floating in your blood. Many of them, of course, they go through your blood to get to different places like tissues, but then they hang out in your tissues. But these are the 5 types that are found in your blood. The lymphocytes, monocytes that actually become macrophages and dendritic cells once they go into the solid tissues of your body, neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils. Right? There's a good way to remember these. They all have different functions, and as a result, they're not needed in the same numbers or populations. So this is slide 10 now, so hopefully we don't have any more graphics glitches and you guys are seeing this also, right? So because of their different functions, they're present in different populations. Some of them are super common in your blood. Some of them are very rare. So if you were to take a little blood sample, like a phlebotomist does a little blood draw, and you put some blood on a slide and you spread the blood out and maybe you stain it with some stains that allow you to see them under the microscope, you can actually see these different populations, right? And for those of you who are taking lab this semester, we will do this in the first couple weeks of class. You'll have an opportunity to see blood smears. The most abundant of these 5 types of white blood cells or leukocytes in your blood are the neutrophils. So anywhere from 40 to 75% of the white blood cells in your blood at any given time are these neutrophils. I say 40 to 75 because that varies from person to person and also depending upon whether or not you're actually experiencing an infection. Okay? Then the second most common one are the small lymphocytes. Right, so these small lymphocytes, things like B cells, T cells, they are pretty abundant floating around in your blood as well. 20 to 50% of the white blood cells in your blood at any given time are the small lymphocytes. Then you have monocytes that I mentioned previously are going around in your blood until they get to certain spots in your tissue, in which case they will leave the blood and become things like macrophages or dendritic cells. So those are about 2 to 10%. Then you have the rare things, these granulocytes like eosinophils, 1 to 6%. And the rarest of the 5 are the basophils. So fewer than 1% of the white blood cells are the basophils. So what I want you to know about this, right? I don't necessarily want you to memorize these different percentages because like I said, that kind of varies from person to person and depending upon your health. But I do want you to remember this order, right? From neutrophils down to basophils. And a good way to memorize that, right, is by this little mnemonic here, right? Never let monkeys eat bananas. Right? Neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils, right? If you can remember that, then you're set. Okay, and like pretty much now that you've learned it, you can't even forget it. So you're like all set. So that's all the studying you had to do for that, right? Never let monkeys eat bananas, right? Yeah, this monkey, he's like, no, not this again. I hate immunology class, right? Okay. Anyhow, so let's take a look now at some examples of these common white blood cells and what they do. The first example that I want to give you this whole semester, and we will become good friends with this semester, is the macrophage, right? So the macrophage is this white blood cell that started off in the blood as a monocyte. It arrived at some spot in your body where it then left the blood vessel and went into the solid tissue, and it transformed. It finishes its differentiation, and from a monocyte, it finishes what it's supposed to be and can become a macrophage. And then this macrophage is sort of this like amoeba-like thing, right? That's just crawling around inside of your solid tissues, looking for things to clean up, right? Looking for things to attack and destroy. So the macrophage is very much our mall cop, right? On patrol. It's constantly patrolling our tissues, looking for pathogens. It has receptors on its surface. So these little blue things are certain proteins that are the right shape to recognize those generic pathogen features. And when they do, They help do things like the macrophage can then use these receptors to grab onto the bacteria. So in this case, this bumpy hot dog thing is a bacteria, right? It's recognized because it has these generic features on it that the macrophage came pre-programmed with the right shaped receptors to look for. The receptors bind and it helps pull in the bacteria so that the macrophage can phagocytose or eat it, right? And then once it's taken in, the vesicle here, the vacuole that contains this bacteria, then fuses with other vesicles inside the macrophage that contain all kinds of nasty enzymes and things that will then digest the bacteria. So when the phagosome here, right, meets up with the lysosome, it fuses together, so it empties all these nasty contents onto the bacteria. So we call this a phagolysosome, and it degrades the bacteria and it destroys it. Right. At the same time, I mentioned to you that part of our innate response might not necessarily be just focused on directly recognizing the pathogen, right, like you see on the left of the cartoon here. The macrophage also has other proteins on its surface, other receptors like this dark blue purple receptor that's different than the light blue one on the left. In this particular case, this receptor recognizes certain molecules that are shed by the bacteria. So the bacteria is still floating around over here, but it's releasing some of these little, red, I don't know what these bumps and these little red dots, right, are bacterial components that are sort of like a telltale evidence that bacteria is present. So the macrophage might have receptors that just simply receive this three-dimensional little shape. And by activating the receptor can signal the nucleus of the macrophage and tell the macrophage, hey, we're picking up some evidence here of generic bacterial features. Maybe we should go ahead and start waking up other cells and let the immune system know that something is going on. Right? So the way that happens is that the macrophage will then turn on the gene expression of certain genes that up until this point were quiet, and those genes then code for these little proteins here, these little different colored triangles that are meant to be released by the macrophage so that other cells in the immune system around it can receive these little triangles as kind of like a message to wake up. These little proteins, and there are many different types of them, because they all function as little messages to wake up other cells, we call them cytokines, all right? Because again, from Greek, kine is kind of like kinetic, right, movement, because early researchers saw that if you had in the lab a dish of these white blood cells and you sprinkled these cytokines on them, the cells would start moving to where these cytokines were coming from. Right? And the cyto just means, the cytoplasm of these cells, it's moving. Okay. Let's look at the left side here, the adaptive side. And again, today is just giving you this big overview and hopefully getting you kind of interested in all these things we're going to talk about. Let's take a look at these adaptive effectors like the B cell and the T cell. All right, so this is slide 13 now. So this is your sort of quick overview of adaptive training. Right. So lymphocytes like B cells and T cells, the B cells, their job is to identify novel pathogens and spread the knowledge that something new has come along here, bad clown, exotic clown, and it wants to go ahead and train the rest of the immune system to be on alert. Right. T cells, on the other hand, they will learn the identification from cells like B cells, and they are the SWAT team that's going to mount the powerful attack. So there are different types of receptors involved here. The B cells have on their surface these Y-shaped things that we call immunoglobulins. Right? Now you might say, wait, I thought these Y-shaped things were antibodies. Yes, they are. But when antibodies start off, they are actually bound to the surface of the B cell that makes them. Right? And until there's actually some proven need to have these antibodies floating around, they will remain just as these B cell receptors stuck on the surface of B cell, and we just call them immunoglobulins. Right? If in fact it turns out that these immunoglobulins are very valuable in fighting a particular pathogen, they can then be remade as free-floating antibodies. So antibodies are immunoglobulins, but they are just free-floating immunoglobulins, or Igs. That's what we refer to. Immunoglobulins are Igs. So antibodies are free-floating Igs through your blood. T cells have these T cell receptors, okay, that are not free-floating. And we will learn later why that's so important. And any molecule with a structure that is recognized by these receptors, either by these Igs or by the T cell, we call these an antigen. Okay, so I know we're kind of running out of time because of the technical problems, so I'll go through these last slide pretty quickly. But again, it's just an overview, so don't be bothered if you don't fully understand it. All right. The way our adaptive side works then is that prior to exposure to a particular pathogen that's brand new, your adaptive immune system, doesn't really know what to expect, right? Your adaptive immune system is not psychic. This is what I always say, right? It doesn't know what's coming along next month or next year, but you sort of have to be prepared. So the way your immune system does this is you're constantly making a whole barrage of different B cells, each with different shaped immunoglobulins on their surface. Ever since you were born, you've been making every single day hundreds of millions of different variations of these B cells. If you do get infected, only a small subset of these B cells will have the right immunoglobulins that recognize the novel pathogen. Right? Those B cells, in this case the yellow one here, are now suddenly very valuable, right? Because they know how to make this particular immunoglobulin protein that's recognizing this funny pathogen here. Right? Those B cells will be encouraged to multiply to help spread the knowledge of this pathogen, and they will also start releasing antibodies. The same thing will happen with T cells. Unfortunately, this cartoon decided to show the T cells also as these yellow cells, so it's easy to confuse here, but these are actually meant to be T cells. These are your SWAT team, right? They have on their surface a similar receptor that will recognize the presence of this antigen, and the B cells being alerted will help inform or wake up the small population of T cells that also happen to have the correct recognition protein on their surface. And these are the ones that are going to multiply, so you have many of them, and they will eliminate the pathogen. Okay, so this is the last slide. Therefore, we have different types of tissues in our body where this battle against pathogens takes place. For the generic general response, that battle can just take place anywhere. It's wherever you get a cut or a breach in your skin or the lining of your GI tract, right? Your innate common effector cells will just go to work and try their best to go ahead and beat the pathogen, right? But your adaptive cells, they have more specialized locations where they go to work, where they actually are woken up and trained. For all of the immune cells in our body, all of the cells are made in places like bone marrow. So places like bone marrow are what we call primary immune tissues, where immune cells are made, where they are born. So not just the bone marrow, but places like the thymus, which we will study later when we talk about T cell maturation. Secondary tissues are special types of tissues in the body where things like B cells and T cells, the part of our adaptive immune system that needs to be woken up if needed, that's where they get finally woken up and go to work. So those are things like your tonsils, your lymph nodes, like your spleen, right? All of these places that perhaps you're already familiar with in terms of if you're experiencing an infection, right? You might have swollen tonsils or swollen lymph nodes as evidence that the adaptive cells like B cells and T cells are waking up in those places. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop there. I apologize then again for the delay here. Let me stop the recording.